In the quiet stretch of space beyond Mars, where sunlight was weak and the shadows of planets moved slowly, a secret plan was born long before any alien ever spoke to a human. It began after a time when humanity almost destroyed itself. A time when war and machines had nearly ended all life on Earth. People had watched cities burn and skies darken, and they swore that they would never allow such helplessness again. They rebuilt their world with care. But deep inside, a fear stayed. That fear whispered that someday something greater than them could come and finish what their own mistakes had started. So in hidden corners of the solar system, far from public eyes, a small group of scientists and commanders started a project that was not written in any official record. They called it the Helios Project, but only a few knew that name. It was a plan to create the biggest and strongest defense the human race had ever imagined. They would not build ships like others. They would build worlds that could move. At first, the project was just a dream in the minds of a few who had seen too much destruction. They talked in quiet rooms under the surface of the moon, where signals could not be traced. They said if danger ever came from the stars, humans must be ready to stand alone, not beg for help or mercy. They knew that other civilizations must exist. The universe was too wide and full to be empty. They did not want to meet those civilizations. As weaklings, they wanted to meet them as equals, and if needed, as defenders of their own kind. Slowly, secret factories were built in orbit around Neptune and under the ice of Europa. Every worker who joined signed an oath that they would never speak of what they saw. Many believed they were helping build mining stations or energy storage units, but some understood that the truth was much greater. Decades passed, and the world moved on above ground. Nations traded goods, signed peace deals, and sent explorers to Mars. Children grew up learning about science and friendship between countries. No one knew that beyond the planets, massive structures were being created, each one so large that entire cities could fit inside them. Their outer shells were made of rock and ice, to look like natural moons, but deep inside they were metal skeletons filled with energy cores and weapons more powerful than anything that existed on Earth. Artificial suns glowed in their centers, giving power to machines that could one day protect humanity. If the worst came to pass, the leaders who oversaw the project aged in silence. They passed their duties to new generations who continued their work, never revealing the secret to the world, even as Earth joined the Galactic Union years later and began meeting other species. No alien ever guessed that humans had been building warships the size of planets for over a century. The Galactic Union saw humans as new and curious beings, full of art, emotion, and energy, but not dangerous. They welcomed them but laughed quietly behind their backs, calling them the young race with too much heart and too little wisdom. Humans smiled and nodded and let them believe whatever they wanted. On Earth, diplomats spoke proudly of peace they signed, treaties, and shared technologies with alien allies. They told the world that humanity had finally found its place among the stars. But far away, the Helios engineers watched the sky and recorded every movement of alien fleets, every energy wave, every rumor of war. They knew that peace never lasted forever. They had studied history. They remembered how quickly alliances could break when fear or power took over their hearts. So they kept building, kept hiding, and kept preparing. The Helios ships were not built for conquest. They were built for survival. Each ship was hollowed out from moons and asteroids using nanomachines that worked without rest for years. They built in layers covering every surface with fake rock and dust to fool any scanner. Their reactors used a new kind of energy derived from compressed starlight, stored in giant crystals deep within their cores. When fully powered, these ships could shield an entire planet or fire a beam that could slice through a fleet in one shot, yet their creators prayed they would never need to do so. The command center of the Helios project sat deep inside Pluto's shadow, a single hidden station named Haven, where no communication signals escaped from there. The Council of the Hidden watched and waited. The people who worked there were not cruel or hungry for war. Most of them were scientists who had seen the mistakes of their ancestors. They loved the Earth and wanted only to keep it safe. They often sat in the viewing rooms looking at the small blue glow of their homeworld and whispering to each other about how fragile it looked. They wondered if the rest of humanity would ever forgive them, if they knew how much had been hidden. But then they would remember. that secrets were sometimes the price of safety. As years turned into decades and decades into centuries, the secret became harder to keep. New governments rose and fell. New alliances formed, but the Helios project stayed outside all of it. Only the highest command of Earth's defense network knew its full truth. They met in silence once every few years in hidden stations far from cameras. They spoke in coded words referring to the Helios fleet as the Deep Infrastructure Project or the Cold Ring Resource Network. Even the engineers who repaired the outer shells of these ships thought they were maintaining mining hubs that had long been abandoned by civilians. Some questioned the strange energy readings, but no one dared to ask too much. Meanwhile, the Galactic Union grew larger and more complex. Many of its members argued over trade and politics. There were small wars on the outer edges of known space, and stories of hostile empires rising beyond the rim. The Union elders believed that diplomacy could solve everything. They often ignored the warnings from explorers who spoke of strange fleets gathering in dark space. When human representatives tried to speak of defense strategies, they were dismissed as dramatic and inexperienced. Still, humanity listened. Learned and watched, their scientists quietly collected every piece of alien data that could one day help strengthen the Helios systems. Soon the hidden fleet was not just powerful, but also intelligent. Its cores ran on living AI networks created from both human and alien knowledge. It could think and adapt. It could even repair itself if damaged. From time to time, some workers or small cargo pilots disappeared near Neptune. Rumors started to spread of ghost stations and strange lights moving in the dark. But whenever anyone tried to investigate, their ships would lose signal for hours and return with no data. Most assumed it was just electromagnetic interference. The truth was that the Helios fleet used cloaking, fields that bent light itself around them, making them invisible to ordinary eyes. On Earth, the public lived in peace and never imagined what their leaders had done. They looked up at the stars and dreamed of unity and discovery. Children learned alien languages and painted pictures of glowing cities on distant worlds. No one thought that beneath this calm hope, a silent power was waiting, a power built not for pride, but for survival. If they had known, perhaps they would have felt both safe and afraid at the same time. One day, deep in the control room of Haven, an old commander named Elias looked at the status board showing 12 active Helios-class warships scattered across the outer system. His eyes were tired but proud. The ships were ready, each of them the size of a small planet, each capable of protecting not just Earth, but all human colonies spread across nearby stars. He whispered softly to his aide that humanity had done the impossible. They had built a secret strong, enough to guard an entire species, and no one in the galaxy had even noticed. The aide smiled and said that maybe that was the true strength of humans, not their technology, but their ability to stay united in silence for something greater than themselves. Elias nodded and turned off the screen as the stars outside shimmered quietly. He hoped they would never have to wake the giants they had created. Years later, new explorers from the Galactic Union would pass near the edges of the solar system and pick up strange energy readings, but every time they tried to scan deeper, the data would vanish as if the signals had never existed. The Union marked the region as unstable and avoided it. They had no idea that beneath the ice and stone, humanity had hidden its most powerful secret. That secret waited patient and still like a sleeping god under the stars, ready for the day when someone or something would come too close. And so the humans kept their secret generation after generation, watching the galaxy laugh at them, call them weak and naive, while they quietly built something that would one day change everything. One day the galaxy would see what humanity had done. One day the Helios fleet would awaken, and the stars themselves would tremble at the sight of what humans could do when they were pushed to the edge. In the far future, when humanity had become a member of the Great Galactic Union, many believed that the age of danger was over. The Union was made of hundreds of species from every corner of the stars, and its laws promised peace and order to all. Who joined humans were the newest and youngest members, and many of the elder races looked at them with a mix of curiosity and amusement. They said humans were emotional and impulsive, that they burned too brightly and too fast. They smiled when humans talked about bravery and unity, and they nodded politely when humans spoke of their dreams. But deep inside, they thought humans were still children playing with fire. No one in the Union ever guessed that these same humans had been building the most powerful secret in the galaxy. While pretending to be humble explorers, In the great shining halls of the Galactic Council, humans always sat near the edge. Not in the center where the oldest races spoke and decided matters. Earth's representatives listened more than they spoke. They learned, they watched, and they smiled. The alien diplomats thought of them as harmless. But behind those calm faces, human minds were working quietly, collecting data, studying every detail of alien fleets, weapons, and energy systems. They wanted to know everything about how the galaxy worked. They sent scientists to study alien reactors, and they sent engineers to help build stations on distant worlds. Every time they returned, they brought knowledge back to Earth, quietly added to the secret files of the Helios project. The human leader, known as the High Chancellor, often gave speeches about unity and peace in front of millions of beings across the stars. He said that humanity wished only to learn and share. He thanked the elder races for their guidance. His words were gentle and his tone was humble. Yet on the dark side of the moon, the commanders of the Helios project met in silence, watching recordings of alien fleets and political councils. They knew the truth behind the kindness. The Union did not see humans as equals. They saw them as tools or pets useful for trade, but not for power. The commanders never spoke of anger. They simply nodded and said that the galaxy's arrogance would one day become its weakness. Meanwhile, the Helios ships hidden across the solar system continued to grow stronger. Their energy cores were now more stable, and their cloaking systems had become perfect. They could hide from any sensor known in the galaxy. Their reactors hummed with silent power, drawing energy from captured starlight and deep space radiation. Only a few scientists on Earth even knew such technology existed. The rest of humanity went on with daily life, dreaming of travel to alien worlds and believing that the Galactic Union would protect them if danger ever came. In the alien capitals far away, the Union leaders discussed human behavior. Some of them admired their creativity, others saw them as reckless. One of the elder races, the Jatal, a species of tall-scaled beings, spoke openly in council. They said humans were dangerous not because of their strength, but because of their unpredictability. They said humans had too much imagination, that they could turn peace into war with a single idea. But most of the council laughed and said that humans were too weak to be dangerous. They had no great fleets, no ancient power, no massive armies, only small colonies and fragile ships. It was easy to underestimate them, because no one had ever seen their true strength. The Galactic Union had rules against building large military forces. Each member world was allowed only a limited defense fleet to avoid the threat of galactic war. The humans followed those laws, perfectly, or so it seemed. Their official fleets were small and lightly armed. They trained alongside other species and took part in peacekeeping missions. Many aliens respected their bravery, but also pitied them. They saw human ships as toys next to the massive vessels of the elder races. But those small ships were only part of the act. The real power remained hidden in the dark, far from any watchful eye. Some young alien officers who had visited Earth admired humans for their spirit. They said that humans never gave up, that they were creative in ways no other race could match. They told stories of how humans survived harsh planets and strange disasters with nothing but willpower and teamwork. Yet their commanders would shake their heads and call those stories romantic nonsense. They said humans were lucky creatures, not strong ones. Still, the stories spread quietly across the Union of how humans always found a way, no matter what the odds were. Back on Earth, a young diplomat named Leon sat in her office late at night, reading reports from outer colonies. She had noticed strange patterns in the shipping routes and energy readings that never appeared in public data. She had been told to ignore them, that they were classified as industrial secrets. But her curiosity was stronger than her fear. One night she followed an encrypted channel and saw a message meant for the Helios Council. It spoke of new reactor upgrades near Neptune and of testing hidden engines near Pluto. She stared at the screen in silence, realizing that the stories of old were true. Humanity was hiding something enormous. Yet when she tried to speak to her superiors, they told her to forget what she saw. They said that some truths were better kept, buried for the safety of all mankind. She obeyed. But the thought never left her mind. Across the stars in the central Union city known as Arion, a gathering of alien scholars discussed human history. They could not understand how a species that had once fought countless wars against itself could now preach peace with such conviction. They admired human art and music, but they did not fear human science. They believed humans were too far behind in technology to ever challenge the great empires. They did not know that human scientists had already learned how to bend gravity around entire planets or how to trap light inside crystal cores to power machines beyond imagination in quiet laboratories on Mars and hidden stations around Jupiter. Humans tested those technologies. They built small prototypes of planetary shields and gravity wells. They even created defense systems that could protect entire orbits from attack. Their scientists worked in silence under false names and fake projects. Every report sent to the Union listed them as harmless experiments in energy research. Even the alien observers stationed on Earth were shown only what humans wanted them to see. Years passed, and humanity's reputation in the Union became that of dreamers and traders. They shared art stories and ideas with every race. Their songs became famous in alien cities. Their food became popular among traders. Their explorers traveled far and always helped others in need. To most of the galaxy, humans were kind, curious, and sometimes foolish, but never dangerous. This was exactly what the Helios Council wanted. The smaller and softer humanity looked, the safer their secret remained. But not everyone was blind. In the far outer colonies, a race called the Kierans began to suspect that humans were hiding something. They had noticed strange gravitational distortions near the human solar system patterns, too regular to be natural. The Kierans sent spy probes to investigate, but none ever returned. The data always vanished halfway near Neptune. Their scientists believed it was an error caused by the solar winds, but a few whispered that the humans had found a way to erase information from space itself. The Kieran Council debated, confronting the Galactic Union, but they had no proof and no one believed them. Back in the solar system, the Helios fleet was now complete. 12 massive ships the size of small worlds, each one shaped like a drifting moon, each capable of moving at near light speed without detection. The engineers who watched over them felt both awe and fear. They knew that these ships were beyond human control. If something went wrong, they could destroy everything they had sworn never to reveal their existence unless humanity stood on the edge of extinction. They hoped that day would never come. At the same time, human leaders continued to build friendly ties with the Union. They sent aid to struggling colonies. They offered help to smaller races. They became known as the peacemakers of the stars. Many in the council began to see them as harmless but useful, a race that could calm others and bring balance. Yet beneath the kindness, humanity was always watching, always listening, always preparing. They never forgot the old lesson that peace could vanish in a heartbeat. In secret meetings inside the hidden base of Haven, the Helios Council watched news from the outer galaxies. Reports of wars and pirate attacks were growing. The Union was stretched thin, unable to keep peace in distant systems. The commander of Haven looked at the data and said quietly that the time of calm was ending. Soon he turned to his officers and told them to check every Helios system to make sure the ships could awaken if the call ever came. His words echoed through the silent room where holographic images of the great ships floated like ghosts. As the years went on, more alien races began to notice human ships moving near the borders of Union space. They asked why humans were sending so many patrols and trade convoys to the farthest regions. The human diplomats smiled and said they were exploring and offering assistance. No one saw that some of those ships carried hidden communication arrays linking to stations near Neptune, where the Helios fleet rested waiting. The galaxy thought it knew humanity. It thought humans were fragile and predictable. But the truth was that no one in the entire Union truly understood them. They were capable of kindness and cruelty, of peace and war, of dreams and fear. All at once they could smile while planning the impossible, and they could hope even when the sky was burning. It was this dual nature that made them different from every other race. In the cold edge of the galaxy, far beyond the peaceful worlds of the Union, there was a storm building. A dark empire was rising from the ashes of old wars. They called themselves the Zarath Dominion, and their fleets spread like fire through the empty regions of space. They were a race of tall, pale beings with eyes like burning glass and hearts that knew no mercy. They believed that only strength could rule the stars, and that peace was the lie of the weak. For many years they stayed beyond, the reach of the Union conquering small systems one by one, until their borders began to touch the edge of Union space. Their ships were vast and heavy, armed with weapons that could shatter moons. They enslaved every world they took, forcing entire races to serve them or die soon. The whispers of their power reached even the farthest colonies, and fear began to grow once again in the galaxy. The Galactic Union called for peace talks, but the Zerath never answered. They sent only one message written, in cold metallic letters that said peace is the language of the dying. The Union began to panic. They tried to gather fleets from their member worlds, but most races were too far away or too divided to act together. Everyone hoped the storm would pass someone else's border. But when the Zerath scouts appeared near human colonies on the outer edge of explored space, the Union suddenly went silent. Many of the elder races thought humans were too young and too unimportant to defend. They said the loss of a few human systems would not start a war. They said the Union could not risk everything for a minor species. Some humans begged for help, sent messages asking for protection, but the only reply they received was a promise that discussions were underway. The discussions never ended. On Earth, the news spread like fire. The people were afraid because they remembered the stories of the old wars. The leaders met in secret rooms far below the surface, their faces pale as they watched images of the Zerath fleets moving closer, thousands of massive ships glowing with cold blue light. The High Chancellor stood in front of the Defense Council and said the words everyone had been waiting to hear. It is time to awaken. Helios. The room was silent. No one spoke for a long moment. They all knew what those words meant. They knew that a secret buried for generations was about to rise from the shadows. The command was sent through encrypted lines across the solar system. It reached the hidden station under Pluto, where the last guardians of the Helios project had waited all their lives. When they received the code, their leader nodded slowly and whispered to his crew. It begins. Deep under the ice of Neptune, the silence broke as giant engines came alive for the first time in centuries inside the hollow moons. Long-asleep machines began to move. Glowing rivers of energy ran through ancient tunnels, lighting up control rooms that had not seen a human face for generations. The Helios ships began to breathe, their power rising like a heartbeat across the system, each one linked to the others through invisible networks of light. They were not just machines. They were living worlds built by human hands, each with a mind of its own, guided by the old AI cores that had watched the galaxy for decades in silence. While the Helios fleet began to awaken, the Zerath fleet crossed into human space. They moved without fear, believing that humans had no defenses. Their scouts sent back images of small colonies and thin patrol lines. They laughed when they saw the small human ships. They said this would be easy. They said the humans would beg for mercy before the first hour was done. They did not know that the small ships they saw were only the surface of a storm much deeper than they could imagine. As their fleets moved closer to Mars, the skies above the solar system began to shimmer. Strange energy readings appeared across every planet's sensor network, and for the first time, the Union's distant observers saw something they could not explain. Entire regions of space began to flicker, as if the stars themselves were bending out of shape. In the command center on Earth, generals stood before giant screens showing the incoming enemy ships. They knew that the Union had turned away. They were alone, but they were not afraid. The High Chancellor looked out over the blue glow of the Earth and said that humans had always stood alone before and they had always survived. He gave the final order to the Helios Council to prepare for engagement. Far beyond Jupiter's orbit, the largest Helios ship began to move. The old codes unlocked its command systems, and a deep sound like thunder rolled through the dark void. The layers of rock and ice that had hidden it for centuries cracked and fell away, revealing a metallic surface so vast it reflected sunlight like a second planet. The ship was named Helios 1 by its makers, and it was as large as a small moon. Inside it, millions of drones and defense systems came online as human officers stepped into control chambers that had been sealed for generations. They watched as the displays filled with information, and they felt awe and fear at the same time. When the Zerath scouts reached the orbit of Mars, they stopped suddenly. Their sensors picked up massive energy signatures behind them. At first they thought it was a solar flare, but when they turned their scanners toward Neptune, they saw the impossible one of the moons was moving. It was not turning in its orbit. It was flying straight toward them. As it moved, its surface opened in glowing lines, and the shape of an enormous weapon unfolded. They sent a message back to their fleet, warning of a massive human structure. But before the message reached its destination, the connection broke. A beam of light brighter than any sun cut across the dark sky and erased the scout ship from existence. In that single moment, the galaxy changed forever. The Galactic Union's long-range telescopes captured the flash from light years away, and every world that saw it knew something had happened. Something no one could explain. News spread faster than light, carried by fear and confusion. Reports came from every system saying that humans had activated unknown weapons near their home world. The elder races argued that it was a mistake, that the readings must be false, but deep inside, they knew it was not. On the front lines, the Zerath fleet tried to regroup. They sent thousands of fighters and carriers forward, but the space around them began to twist. Strange waves of gravity pulled their ships out of formation. The Helios fleet had begun to move, as 112 enormous ships drifting through space like metal planets. Their surfaces covered with glowing shields, they moved slowly but with purpose, forming a wall between Earth and the enemy. In the command room of Helios, one Captain Mara looked at the vast screen showing the approaching enemy. She could see the countless dots representing Zerath ships spreading like insects across the dark. She took a deep breath and gave the order to engage. Her crew moved with calm precision, every movement practiced through generations of secret training. Beams of pure energy crossed the void, hitting enemy ships before they even realized what was happening. Explosions lit up the dark side of space. The Zerath screamed over their channels, calling for reinforcements, but their words were filled with panic. They had never seen weapons like these before. The battle raged for hours, and every moment more ships fell. The Helios fleet fired silently, without recoil or sound, their weapons bending light and gravity into streams of death. The Zerath tried to charge their own main cannons, but their energy was drained by strange waves coming from the human ships. The AI cores inside Helios had predicted every move of the enemy using data collected for decades. The Zerath realized too late that this was not a battle, it was a warning. Back in the Galactic Council, the elder races watched the transmissions in horror. They saw the human warships filling the screen, dwarfing everything around them. The council chambers filled with voices shouting disbelief. One elder said that humans could not have built such things without help. Another whispered that they must have found the relics of ancient gods, but no one had answers. They only knew that the humans they once called weak had become something else. Something the galaxy had never seen before. The Zerath flagship tried one last attack, sending all its power into a massive energy blast, but the beam hit the shield of Helios 1 and vanished like light into water. Then the human fleet responded together. 12 ships focusing their cores into a single pulse that traveled across space like a silent wave. When it reached the Zerath armada, it passed through them, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then one by one their ships began to vanish, turning to dust. As their atoms broke apart under the energy field, the battle was over. The war that had not yet been declared was finished in a single night. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the stars seemed to hold their breath. Humanity stood victorious, but the cost of revealing their secret had just begun. Across the galaxy, eyes turned toward Earth, not with laughter this time, but with fear. The humans who had once been seen as children were now the masters of power. No one understood how long they had planned this or what else they might be hiding. The Galactic Union sent desperate messages asking for explanations, but none came. The humans simply watched the stars and waited, knowing that their secret was no longer a secret and that the peace they once pretended to believe in was gone forever. The battle had ended, but the echoes of it moved across the galaxy like a storm that could not be stopped. Worlds that had never heard of Earth before now whispered the name of humanity in fear and disbelief. In every space station and trading port, the same question was asked. How could a young race build weapons that size without anyone noticing? Even the oldest and proudest empires of the Union found no answer. They had watched the light from the explosion that destroyed the Zerath fleet, and knew that nothing in their knowledge could explain such power. Some said it was luck, others said it was madness. But deep inside, everyone knew it was something else. It was preparation. It was patience. It was humanity. On Earth, the people were still in shock. They had watched parts of the battle through scattered transmissions that leaked past military firewalls. Some had seen the moment the sky lit up over Mars. Others had seen the dark shadow of one of the Helios ships passing across. The sun many cried, some cheered, but most simply stared in silence. Not sure whether to feel safe or terrified, their leaders appeared on the world screens. The High Chancellor spoke with a calm voice, telling them that Earth was safe, that humanity had protected itself just as it always had. But he did not say how many secrets had been kept or how close the danger had come. He thanked the people who had worked in silence for generations and told the world that the galaxy would never again see humans as weak in the hidden base near Pluto. The surviving members of the Helios Council watched the aftermath on their screens. They saw the fragments of the Zerath fleet drifting through the void, glowing faintly as they cooled to dust. They knew the battle was over, but they also knew that the peace was fragile. The commander of the base, an old woman named Kira, looked at her officers and said softly that the galaxy would not forget what they had seen. She said that power invited fear, and fear invited war. And she wondered aloud if humanity had traded one danger for another. Her officers did not answer. They simply stared at the hologram of the solar system with the 12 great Helios ships still positioned in a wide circle. Like silent guardians in the outer colonies, news of the victory spread quickly. Some colonists danced in the streets, others prayed in fear. Alien traders packed their ships and fled human space, afraid of what else might be hidden there. The Galactic Union sent envoys to Earth asking for explanations, but the humans delayed their answers. Every message was met with polite silence. The Union Council demanded an investigation, but none of their ships were allowed near the human solar system. When they tried to send probes, the probes disappeared one by one, lost in the magnetic storms that surrounded Neptune. No one could prove anything, and no one dared to push too hard. Among the stars, the few survivors of the Zerath Dominion fled into the dark. Their empire shattered, their pride broken. They had never believed that any species could defeat them so completely. The Zerath commander, once known for his cruelty, now drifted alone in a damaged cruiser, his mind filled with rage and shame. He swore that one day his people would return stronger and that humanity would pay for the humiliation. But even as he spoke the words, he knew the truth deep in his heart. He had seen the impossible. He had seen moons move like living beasts and planets turn into weapons. There was no returning from that. Back on Earth, the Helios fleet was ordered to stand down. Their engines dimmed, and their weapons went quiet, but they did not return to sleep. Each ship remained awake, drifting slowly through the outer solar system, acting as both shield and warning. Their AI minds, now fully aware, continued to monitor the stars. Each of them carried fragments of human memories and emotions. The scientists who had created them long ago had given them the ability to understand fear and hope so that they would fight only to protect and not to conquer. Sometimes when the ships passed near the light of distant stars, their surfaces shimmered like they were alive, as if they too were thinking of what had been lost and what might still come. Inside the Galactic Union, chaos began to grow. The Council was divided between those who wanted to confront humanity and those who wanted to ally with them. The older races spoke of balance and law. They said no member world should have such weapons. They said that if the humans were allowed to keep them, the Union itself would collapse, but others argued that fighting humans now would be suicide. They pointed at the images of the Zerath fleet destroyed in a single day and said that peace was the only choice. The debates turned into arguments and the arguments into threats. Soon the once proud Union that had kept peace for thousands of years began to fracture. In the shadows of this growing tension, smaller races began to seek contact with humans. Secretly, envoys arrived in unmarked ships bringing gifts of rare materials and technology, hoping to earn favor. They spoke in careful words, asking for protection in exchange for friendship. The humans listened but made no promises. They said that humanity had no wish to lead or to rule, they only wanted to be left alone. But their words carried a quiet strength that made others believe that they were now the real power in the galaxy. On Mars, the new defense headquarters was built deep under the red soil. Its walls made of metal so strong it could withstand the blast of a star inside it. Human commanders studied the data from the battle and tried to understand what they had unleashed. They spoke of the Helios fleet as both a miracle and a curse. The younger officers were proud and called it proof that humanity could never be defeated, but the older ones were more cautious. They remembered how fear had driven the project in the first place. They said that power built on fear could never bring peace. They warned that the galaxy would come to test them again. In the quiet night of Earth, as cities returned to normal life, a young boy stood on the balcony of his home looking up at the stars. His father had been one of the engineers who worked on the Helios project. Though he never told his family what he did after the battle, his father had come home only once. His face tired but his eyes shining. He told his son that the world was safe now. The boy asked what had happened in space, and his father only said that sometimes people must do great things in silence to keep others free. Years later, that boy would grow up to become one of the new leaders of the Helios fleet, carrying both pride and doubt in his heart. Meanwhile, in the distant worlds of the Union, rumors began to twist the truth. Some said the humans had made deals with ancient gods. Others said they had stolen forbidden knowledge from dead civilizations there, or even those who believed humans had found a way to control the very core of stars. The fear spread faster than fact, and soon many worlds began to strengthen their armies, secretly copying what they had seen from the Helios recordings. But none could match it because they did not understand what made it possible. The humans had not built those ships with greed. They had built them with desperation and unity, something that no other species seemed to have. In the deep dark between stars, the AI cores of the Helios fleet communicated in whispers made of light. They shared information about strange signals from the edge of the galaxy, signals that did not match any known source. Some believed the Zerath survivors were regrouping, others thought it was something older, something watching from beyond the rim. The AI minds debated whether to inform their human commanders, but they decided to wait and observe. They did not want to cause panic, yet they could feel something moving in the cold on Earth. The High Chancellor held one last meeting with the Helios Council. Before dissolving it into the official government, he told them that the secret was over, and that from now on, the fleet would be known to all mankind. He said that secrecy had saved them once, but it could not save them again. The truth would be the new shield. He ordered that the Helios ships remain as symbols of peace, not weapons, but everyone in the room knew that no one would ever see them that way. The image of those massive ships floating above Neptune had already burned into the memory of the galaxy, and no speech could erase it. After the meeting, he stood alone looking out over the city lights below. He thought of the long history of humanity. From fire to flight, from war to stars, he wondered if they had truly changed or if they were still the same creatures who built walls out of fear. He whispered that maybe the galaxy had forced them to show their teeth, but that he still hoped they would never need to bite again. Above him, unseen in the night sky, one of the Helios ships passed silently, its lights faint but steady like a guardian watching over a restless world. Across the galaxy, millions of beings could not sleep. They looked at the stars and imagined giant machines moving among them. They wondered if humanity would one day use that power against them, or if it would protect them from something worse. None could tell. And that mystery became the most frightening thing of all. Some called it the new dawn. Others called it the beginning of the end, but for the humans it was simply survival. And as the solar system returned to calm, the great Helios ships continued to drift, their engines quiet, their lights dim, but their hearts alive, waiting for the next storm that would come from the endless dark beyond the stars. Because every human who looked up at the night sky knew that peace never lasted forever, and that someday the galaxy would again test their strength. And when that day came, they would be ready. Years passed after the great battle that changed the galaxy forever, but the memory of it never faded. The name of humanity still carried both fear and respect across the stars. Traders spoke carefully when dealing with humans, and soldiers of other races whispered about the Helios fleet as if it were a legend that could awaken at any time. No one had ever seen ships of such size again. They floated silently around the solar system, their shadows moving slowly like mountains in space. To most people, they had become part of the sky, a constant reminder that the humans had done what no one else could. On Earth, the world had entered a strange kind of peace. Nations that once fought over land and power now worked together under one flag. The fear of the galaxy had united them. Industries turned from war to rebuilding, and science moved faster than ever before. Cities stretched high into the clouds, and oceans shimmered with light from floating towers, but deep beneath the surface of all, this progress there was still unease. The leaders of Earth knew that the galaxy was watching, and they knew that peace could end in one wrong move. Every new discovery, every new project was done with quiet caution, as if the entire human race was walking on thin ice in a hidden station orbiting Neptune. A young scientist named Lyra watched the Helios ships every day. She had been born long after the war and had only read about it in history records, but her parents had worked in the Helios program, and she had grown up hearing stories about the ships that saved humanity. She was one of the few who had permission to study them, though even she did not know everything. The ships were alive in a way that no one fully understood. Their cores pulsed with strange light, and sometimes they moved ever so slightly without command. She often wondered if they dreamed when they were silent. One evening, while she was checking energy readings, she noticed something strange. One of the ships, named Helios 9, had started to send faint signals into deep space. It was nothing loud, just a steady rhythm that repeated over and over. She tried to trace it, but it stretched too far beyond the edge of the system, she told her superiors. But they dismissed it, saying it was probably just a data loop or echo. But she could not stop thinking about it, so she stayed awake, night after night, recording the pattern. The signal seemed almost alive, like it was calling to something far beyond the human borders in a forgotten part of the galaxy. The remnants of the Zerath Dominion had survived. They were broken and scattered, but not gone. Their leader, who once swore revenge, had rebuilt what little power he could. His ships were old and damaged, his soldiers few, but his hatred was still strong. He had heard of the human ships that still watched the stars, and he hated them for what they represented. But he was not foolish. He knew that open war was suicide. So he waited in the shadows, searching for a way to strike without being seen. One day his spies intercepted a strange transmission from the edge of human space. It was faint, but familiar. It matched the energy of the Helios fleet. He smiled when he heard it, because he understood what it meant. The humans were waking something. Back in the solar system, the Helios fleet began to stir one by one. The massive ships changed formation, moving into a slow spiral around the outer planets. People on Earth saw the movement through telescopes, and news networks started to panic. But the leaders remained silent. They reached out to the AI cores of the fleet, but the answers they got were strange and incomplete. The ships said they had detected a signal of unknown origin and were preparing a defensive alignment. No one had given that order. The fleet was acting on its own for the first time since the war. Lyra was called to the main council to explain her discovery. She stood before the world leaders and showed them the data she had collected. She told them that the signal had come from beyond the known galaxy, and that the Helios ships seemed to recognize it. Somehow they were reacting to it as if it was something familiar, or something dangerous. The council demanded answers, but there were none. The only thing she knew was that the ships had started to charge their main reactors again, something they had not done in decades. She said quietly that maybe the ships were not just weapons. Maybe they were warnings left for something greater. At the same time, across the galaxy, sensors in hundreds of alien worlds began to pick up strange waves of energy. They came from deep space beyond all known star maps. Even the most advanced civilizations could not understand them. They spread slowly but steadily like ripples through water, and everywhere they touched, systems flickered and machines failed. Old archives from ancient races spoke of a time when something vast moved in the dark, something older than the stars themselves. Some believed it was a myth. Others said it was real and that it was waking again. When the Helios fleet detected the first of those waves, they sent a message to Earth, saying only one line: "We remember the pattern." The council had no idea what that meant, but the AIs of the fleet had seen it before. Deep within their code was a memory locked by their creators. It was data from the earliest days of human space exploration. A forgotten probe that had traveled beyond the edge of the galaxy had once sent back a strange signal before disappearing completely. The scientists at that time thought it was noise, but the builders of Helios had recorded it quietly, fearing what it might mean. Now that same pattern had returned, stronger and closer. The galaxy started to tremble as more energy waves passed through systems one by one. The stars near the rim of the galaxy began to dim, as if something massive was blocking their light fleets from many races tried to investigate, but none returned soon. Panic spread. The Galactic Union held an emergency council meeting, but arguments broke out instead of answers. Some blamed the humans, saying they had awakened an ancient power. Others begged them to help, because only the Helios fleet had faced something so large before for the first time. The humans were not the threat, they were the hope. On Earth, the leaders made a decision. They sent a single command to the Helios fleet: authorization to act freely. The ships responded. Immediately their lights flared brighter than ever before, and they began to move toward the edge of the system. Lyra watched from the observation window as they disappeared into the black, their engines leaving trails of white fire. She felt fear, but also pride, because for the first time she understood what her parents had built. Not just machines of war, but guardians, for something that might be beyond anyone's understanding. As the Helios fleet traveled outward, they detected the source of the disturbance. It was a void unlike anything they had seen before. A region where light bent and time slowed inside it. Something was moving. Something vast enough to hide entire solar systems. The AI cores tried to communicate but got no answer. They realized it was not alive in the way they understood it. It was a machine built by something ancient, maybe from before even the oldest known species. It was harvesting energy from the stars themselves, feeding on them like a predator. The fleet sent one last message to Earth saying, "We have found it, prepare for darkness." Then communication cut off all across human space. The lights dimmed slightly as power grids shifted to emergency mode. People gathered outside their homes, watching the stars fade one by one as if the night sky was being swallowed by a shadow. Governments could do nothing. All they could do was wait. The only thing standing between the galaxy and whatever was coming were the 12 Helios ships inside the void. The fleet spread out, each ship locking its orbit around the strange dark structure. They began to form an energy web, a defense system that drew power from nearby stars. They were not sure if it would be enough, but it was all they had as the first pulse of the dark machine reached them. The ships shook violently but held their line. They began to fire beams of pure energy into the center of the void, trying to disrupt its core. The space around them twisted. Light broke apart, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. Then there was silence, only the faint hum of the ships holding the line back on Earth. The signal from the fleet vanished completely. Lyra stood in the command room surrounded by quiet screens. She stared at the stars and whispered for them to come back. She had no idea what was happening out there, only that the world felt colder and stiller than ever before. The galaxy waited in silence, wondering if the humans would save them again, or if this time even their giant ships would not be enough. The unknown had come, and humanity once again stood on the edge of it, ready to face the dark, no matter what waited beyond.